I didn't ruin my life. That's the lie that keeps people comfortable. Ruining your life is obvious. It's loud. It comes with consequences everyone can see. What I did was quieter. I chose the easier version. Again. And again. And again. At the time, it felt like intelligence. Why suffer unnecessarily? Why struggle when there's a smoother option? Why make life harder than it needs to be? Those questions sounded reasonable. They sounded mature. I didn't choose laziness. I chose efficiency. I chose paths that didn't demand too much of me. Relationships that didn't challenge my comfort. Decisions that didn't threaten stability. I told myself I was avoiding chaos. What I was really avoiding was friction. And friction, I would later learn, is where growth lives. Back then, I didn't feel lost. I felt settled. My life worked. Bills were paid. Days were predictable. Nothing felt urgent. People around me called it balance. I called it peace. But peace built on avoidance has a cost you don't notice at first. It doesn't hurt immediately. It numbs gradually. I remember the first time I felt the trade-off. There was an opportunity, not dramatic, not glamorous, just meaningful. Something that scared me a little. It would have required learning again. Failing publicly. Starting from a place of not knowing. The easier option was right there. Familiar. Safe. Approved. I chose it without much thought. I even felt relieved. That relief should have warned me. Because relief isn't always peace. Sometimes it's surrender disguised as comfort. After that, the pattern set in. Whenever a decision appeared with two paths, one uncertain and alive, the other stable and predictable, I chose predictability. Every time, I told myself it didn't matter. It's just one choice. There will be others. This isn't the moment to take risks. Moments passed. Others didn't come. Or maybe they did, and I didn't recognize them anymore. I became very good at rationalizing my life. Explaining it. Justifying it. Defending it. I could tell you exactly why my choices made sense. I couldn't tell you why they felt empty. That emptiness didn't feel dramatic. It felt functional. I woke up. Did what was required. Went to sleep. Days stacked neatly. Years followed. At some point, I stopped asking myself difficult questions. Questions like, is this all? Is this who I'm becoming? Is this what I wanted, or just what was easiest to maintain? I didn't feel unhappy enough to change. That was the trap. Pain motivates action. Comfort delays it indefinitely. I had traded intensity for stability. And stability is seductive. It tells you nothing is wrong, while quietly removing everything that once made you feel alive. I started noticing small signs. How excited I felt when plans were cancelled. How quickly I avoided anything that might disrupt my routine. How often I said, maybe someday, instead of now. Someday became my favorite word. It allowed me to believe I hadn't abandoned anything. Just postponed it. But postponement without intention is abandonment. I didn't see that yet. I still believed I was being careful. Responsible. Smart. Then one evening, doing something ordinary, something I'd done hundreds of times before, a thought surfaced without warning. Not loud. Not emotional. Just clear. If this continues, nothing will ever change. That thought didn't scare me at first. It settled. And then it spread. I realized something uncomfortable. My life wasn't moving toward anything. It was maintaining itself. Maintenance can look like progress if you don't look too closely. I had built a life that required very little courage. And courage, unused, atrophies. I didn't lose myself in a single moment. I diluted myself over years. Each easy choice shaved off a small part of who I could have been. Not enough to notice. Enough to matter. I wasn't living badly. I was living carefully. And careful living doesn't destroy you. It just ensures you never fully arrive. That was the beginning of the regret. Not regret for a mistake. Regret for a pattern. A pattern of choosing what asked the least of me, and calling it wisdom. Comfort has a way of disguising itself as kindness. It tells you you've earned rest. That you've been through enough already. That choosing ease is not weakness, it's wisdom. For a long time, I believed that. Every time something difficult appeared on the horizon, I asked the same question: is this necessary? If the answer wasn't obvious, I stepped back. Why invite struggle? Why risk discomfort when things were finally calm? I told myself I was protecting my mental health. Preserving energy. Being selective. But slowly, that selectiveness turned into avoidance. I noticed how narrow my life had become. Not small, narrow. I functioned well inside a limited range of experiences. Anything outside that range felt exhausting before it even began. I stopped trying new things unless success felt likely. I avoided conversations that might challenge me. I chose familiarity over curiosity without thinking twice. The world didn't shrink. I did. The first real crack appeared when something went wrong, not terribly wrong, just wrong enough. A plan failed. A routine broke. An outcome I had relied on disappeared. Nothing catastrophic. But without my usual structure, I felt exposed. I realized how little resilience I had built. Comfort hadn't strengthened me. It had insulated me. I wasn't prepared for uncertainty because I had avoided it for years. That scared me. I had believed the easier life would protect me from instability. Instead, it had made me fragile. I started paying attention to my reactions. How quickly I sought reassurance. How uncomfortable I became when I didn't know what would happen next. How much I needed predictability to feel safe. Those weren't signs of peace. They were signs of dependence. Dependence on conditions being just right. I began to feel a strange kind of envy toward people who struggled openly. People who failed. Who tried things that didn't work. Who lived with visible effort. They looked tired. But they also looked alive. Their lives had texture. Mine had polish. Polish hides scratches, but it also hides depth. I started revisiting moments from my past. Times when I had chosen the safer option and told myself it was temporary. Times when I promised I would take risks later. Times when I avoided starting over because it felt inefficient. I realized that later had quietly expired. I hadn't noticed when. There was no alarm. Just a slow closing of doors. Some paths don't disappear because you choose something else. They disappear because you never choose them at all. That realization hurt. Not sharply. Dully. Like pressure behind the eyes that doesn't turn into tears. I began to see how comfort had changed my identity. I no longer saw myself as someone capable of transformation. I saw myself as someone who managed circumstances well. Management replaced imagination. Optimization replaced desire. I had optimized my life to the point where there was no room left for discovery. Everything ran smoothly. Nothing surprised me. I realized something unsettling. The easier life had trained me to fear intensity. Intensity of emotion. Intensity of effort. Intensity of commitment. Anything that demanded full presence felt overwhelming. I had learned to keep life at a manageable distance. Close enough to function. Far enough to stay safe. But safety, I was learning, is not the same as fulfillment. I started asking myself a question I had avoided for years: what am I actually capable of? Not what I can handle comfortably. Not what I can manage efficiently. What I can become. That question didn't excite me. It terrified me. Because I didn't know the answer anymore. I had lived within limits so long that I couldn't tell which ones were real and which ones I had built myself. The easier life hadn't just spared me pain. It had spared me from discovering my edges. I realized then that regret wasn't waiting for me in the future. It was already here. Quiet. Embedded in routine. Regret wasn't screaming, "You ruined everything." It was whispering, "You never really tried." That whisper followed me everywhere. In moments of rest. In moments of success. In moments of calm. I understood something important. Comfort delays regret, it doesn't eliminate it. It postpones the reckoning until the stakes feel higher and the time feels shorter. I wasn't facing regret because I failed. I was facing it because I avoided the possibility of failure altogether. That avoidance had shaped my life more than any bold decision ever could. The moral dilemma became impossible to ignore. If I continued choosing ease, my life would remain stable, and permanently unfinished. If I disrupted comfort now, I would face fear, uncertainty, and loss, but also possibility. Neither path was painless. But only one involved growth. I didn't yet know if I was brave enough to choose differently. But I knew one thing with uncomfortable clarity. The easier life had stopped being neutral. It was actively costing me something I couldn't replace. Time. Potential. Depth. And once you see that cost, comfort loses its innocence. It becomes a choice you have to justify. I wasn't sure what I would do next. But I knew this: if I stayed on this path much longer, my life wouldn't end in tragedy. It would end in explanation. And explanations are what people use when they can't point to moments they truly lived. The moment I stopped choosing the easier life didn't arrive with courage. It arrived with honesty. I admitted something I had avoided for years. I wasn't protecting myself. I was hiding. Not from danger, from effort. From the possibility that I might try fully and still fail. From the realization that comfort had become my excuse. That admission hurt more than any risk ever had. Because it stripped away the story I told myself. The story where I was careful, not afraid. Smart, not avoidant. Balanced, not diminished. Once that story fell apart, I couldn't go back to it. The first risk I took wasn't dramatic. I didn't quit everything. I didn't reinvent my life overnight. I chose something small, and deliberately uncomfortable. Something I had postponed for years because it felt inefficient. Uncertain. Exposing. I said yes before my mind could negotiate the fear away. The fear came anyway. My hands shook. My thoughts raced. Every part of me looked for an exit. This is unnecessary. This is reckless. You were fine before. But something else was there too. A quiet sense of arrival. Not success. Presence. For the first time in a long while, I felt fully inside a moment. Not observing it. Not managing it. Living it. The outcome wasn't perfect. It wasn't even impressive. But it was real. And real experiences leave marks. I noticed how my internal landscape began to change. Slowly. Unevenly. I became less dependent on comfort to feel okay. Less afraid of uncertainty. Less invested in having everything under control. Control had been my substitute for confidence. Risk gave me something better. Evidence. Evidence that I could survive discomfort. That I could learn instead of retreat. That effort didn't break me, avoidance did. I began to recognize the lie at the center of the easier life. The lie wasn't that comfort was bad. It was that comfort was harmless. In small doses, it rests you. In excess, it dulls you. I had been overdosing for years. As I continued choosing harder paths, not recklessly, but intentionally, I felt something unfamiliar. Respect. Not from others. From myself. I stopped needing my life to look reasonable at all times. Stopped needing every decision to be defensible. Stopped optimizing everything for minimal discomfort. Some days were harder. Some choices led nowhere. But my life gained texture again. Moments stood out. Not because they were pleasant, because they were earned. I learned something important. Fulfillment doesn't come from choosing the hardest path. It comes from choosing the truest one. Sometimes that path is quiet. Sometimes it's disruptive. Sometimes it fails. But it always asks something of you. And being asked is how you know you're alive. I stopped asking, is this easier? And started asking, is this expanding me or shrinking me? That question changed everything. I no longer feared regret the same way. Regret from trying feels different than regret from avoiding. One teaches. The other haunts. I realized that the life I had lived before wasn't wasted. It taught me how comfort works. How easily it becomes a cage. How quietly it erases possibility. That knowledge was costly, but useful. If you're listening to this and something resonates, hear this carefully. You don't lose your life by choosing ease once or twice. You lose it by building a pattern around avoiding difficulty. The easier life doesn't announce its price up front. It charges you slowly, in potential, in depth, in courage. I didn't destroy my life by choosing comfort. I delayed it. And delay, repeated long enough, feels exactly like loss. Choosing differently didn't make my life simple. It made it mine. Unpredictable. Uneven. Demanding. But honest. I don't chase difficulty for its own sake. I choose it when it's the cost of growth. I choose effort when it's the price of meaning. And when comfort appears, I ask whether it's rest or retreat. That distinction saved me. I chose the easier life for a long time. And I lost myself slowly because of it. But the moment I stopped asking life to be easy and started asking it to be real, my life didn't become perfect. It became present. And presence, even when it's uncomfortable, is the one thing comfort can never give you. That's the trait I finally understand. And it's one I will never undo again.